The Elements of Moral Science by Noah Porter, Part 1. Chapter 0. What is moral science? Its objects and purposes. The very first sentence in Porter's book is a tentative definition. Moral science is the science of duty, that is, the science which defines, regulates, and enforces duty. Porter warns the reader that no definitions can be satisfactory at the entrance of a subject. A good definition is the result of comprehensive study. Since it is something acquired at the end of a process, it cannot be properly delivered in the beginning. Hence, the above definition being tentative and sufficient for didactic purposes. As to science, moral science is no different regarding method and goals. Moral science proposes to give the results of careful observations, subtle and exhaustive analysis, clear and complete definitions, verified inductions, logical deductions, in the form of a consistent, articulated, and finished system. Its object is duty, and Porter notes, is common to all humanity. Just as physics and chemistry study the air we breathe and biology our respiratory system, moral science studies duty and every other reality connected to it. Duty is something every man senses and recognizes in practice. Being something so close to humanity, so close to every person on a very individual level, it is of the utmost importance to understand it and avoid error. The results of its scientific knowledge can be applied to the direction of human conduct and the improvement of human character, to the well-being of the individual and the community in almost every conceivable variety of circumstances. So, what is duty after all? Duty in the concrete is an action or a collection of actions, which ought to be done. In the abstract, it is the quality or relation which is common to and distinguishes such actions. This means that duty is something found really in morally lawful performed actions. But by abstraction, we can isolate the property in our minds and use it as a mark to distinguish actions with and without it, and classify them accordingly. Another characteristic of duty or oughtness is that it is something ideal. Though a concrete action is performed in the here and now, its oughtness points to a standard that is non-local and atemporal. It doesn't matter if that act was, is being, or will be performed in place A or B. Hence, moral science being also a science of the ideal. So again, we have two aspects of moral science. It is a science of the actual, that is, of actions and its causes in space and time, and a science of the ideal, that is, of things beyond causality, space, and time. As much as it is a science of the actual, it is observational and experimental. As much as it is a science of the ideal, it is speculative or philosophical. Like other inductive sciences, it interprets man's capacities in the light of those intuitions which are essential to scientific knowledge, finding in facts and intuitions its principles and rules. Within this sphere, it is strictly and severely an inductive science, so far as it derives conclusions from these presumed data as to what men ought to be and to do. So far it is an ideal, a pure or hypothetical science, and is akin to formal logic and pure mathematics. And what counts as an action? Porter says that external bodily movements count as such, including speech, obviously, but also mental occurrences, states, and moods, such as imagining, remembering, loving, being a sour person, etc. Now, some skeptics, such as non-cognitivists, might ask for the grounds of such a reality, that is, the reality of duty or moral obligation. Porter replies in three ways. First, appealing to common sense. This should not be confused with popular opinion or common wisdom. When Porter says duty is believed by all men with very rare exceptions, he means that this universal belief is indicative or is strong evidence for that there is something real interfering or influencing men's behaviors. Every man claims duties to and from others and himself. Even so-called skeptics cannot avoid feeling and claiming such things. The argument can be fleshed out in the following way. Men are extremely influenced by such a thing as duty. When things are so forceful upon men's behavior, those things happen to be real. Therefore, duty is real. 2. Not only is duty believed and acted on, but it is of the highest importance. Food and water move men to action, but none of them excites the strongest of feelings and willingness to sacrifice. The form of the argument also works through plausible reasoning. Men are strongly moved or affected by duty. When things capture so much importance, reverence, fear, etc. from men, those things happen to be real. Therefore, duty is real. This argument should not be taken in isolation, but in combination with the first one. Everyone can conjure up some example of a moving and exciting illusion, but it is not so easy, maybe impossible, to find an example across so many cultures in time and place. Finally, even if the non-cognitivists are correct, and there is no such thing as duty, or moral obligation, or oughtness, or deontic necessity, whatever you want to call it, such a massive delusion must be understood and its consequent errors prevented. To that effect, a moral science is still needed, although with a revised metaphysics of duty. From the justification of the science, Porter now wants to give a synoptic flight over its research fields, i.e., a taxonomy of subdisciplines. He does this from top to bottom, and then from the bottom to the top. The first order is acquired by analyzing the object as a concrete whole, that is, by dissecting it into parts and spreading them over from the top layers to the lower ones. The second order is acquired by synthesizing the parts back into a whole, from the last dissected parts to the first. The first order can be said to be temporal, the second theoretical. In the temporal order acquired by the analytical method, we have ethics, casuistry, moral science proper or metaethics, psychological metaethics, theory of conscience, philosophical metaethics. In the theoretical order acquired by the synthetical method, we have metaethics, philosophical metaethics, psychological metaethics, theory of conscience, ethics, human rights theory, casuistry, and Christian ethics. We are now to look at some descriptions in the theoretical order. Metaethics, or moral science proper, as Porter called it, concerns the foundations of the science. These foundations are psychological, in the sense that human beings must have some capacities to consider, decide, and produce moral actions, but also detect and conceptualize moral properties. These foundations are also philosophical, in a sense that every science must have a metaphysics of its objects and epistemological principles to operate on. From the two, philosophical metaethics comes first. To science of any kind, certain axioms or fundamental principles are necessary prerequisites. Whether these principles are original and self-evident, or whether they are derived from experience, reasoning, or association, they must be assumed and asserted in order to any scientific deduction or enforcement. Then, psychological metaethics, which answers questions such as, but who is a moral person? What are the endowments which are essential to moral activity? And what are the circumstances which are the conditions of moral responsibility? To ascertain these facts of human nature, to distinguish them carefully, to trace their history and origination, to show their mutual relations and their place in what we may call the moral experiences of man, are the necessary prerequisites to moral science. Theory of conscience is next, since it is the primary organ or instrument by which we interact cognitively and connotatively with moral properties. This subdiscipline answers questions such as, whence and what and how extensive is its authority? Can it be educated? Can it be improved? Can it be destroyed? What place does it hold in respect to custom, tradition, to prevailing opinion, to civil legislation, or to a supposed or actual supernatural revelation? On a second level comes the ethical field, which gives us those special and secondary principles and axioms of duty, which then applied become the rules or directions which are required for the regulation of human conduct. Ethics is at the surface level because it is occupied with the classification and arrangement of rules of conduct according to the first impressions over actual and conceivable morally relevant actions. The difference between ethics and metaethics might be better understood by the suffixes ology and graphy, used in scientific disciplines such as geology and geography, lexicology and lexicography. The first of the pairs is occupied with foundational theory. Although it is still in touch with the objects or the relevant data to the field, it treats them on a more conceptual level. The second is very close to the objects and is occupied with collecting, reporting, cataloging, etc. Casuistry is a subfield of ethics concerning cases of conscience, or hard cases where there are conflicts between rules and specified contexts. Theory of human rights concerns the social or living conditions under which morally acceptable human conduct can flourish. Duties to be performed require certain permanent and well-secured conditions of human activity and progress, which man is not only permitted, but morally required under certain limitations to assert and secure to himself. Finally, we have Christian ethics, which serves the purpose of connecting ethics to Christian themes, examples, and precepts contained in special revelation, that is, Scripture. Porter finishes this chapter with some additional reasons to justify the existence and practice of moral science, but they are mostly redundant. They gravitate around their replies to the non-cognitivists.